meeting. Today we are going to start with day one of 2 days of budget hearings. Our hearing is going to be on the Kansas Department of Education's budget, and we are going to start with Gabriella.
Good afternoon, committee. My name is Gabrielle, and I'm a fiscal analyst with Legislative Research. I'll mention Craig Nisenwander, the Deputy Commissioner, is here, as well as John Hess, the Director of Fiscal Services and Operations. They'll provide testimony and be available for questions. The first several pages of our budget analysis give a pretty broad overview. I'm going to move forward to page 871 to start with fiscal year 2022. Subsequent to the 2021 session, one adjustment was made to the $5.8 billion appropriated to the Kansas Department of Education for fiscal year 2022. That adjustment changes the current year approved amount without any legislative action required, and it includes an SGF reappropriation. The agency approved amount includes $12.7 million all SGF to reflect funding reappropriated from fiscal year 2021 to fiscal year 2022. That includes $7.7 million for CAPERS, $1.3 million for school district juvenile detention facilities, and a little over $150,000 for special education services aid, as well as $3.4 million for state foundation aid. Still on that page, the agency requests a revised estimate of $6.1 billion, including $4.2 billion SGF in fiscal year 2022. That's an increase of $314.3 million and an SGF decrease of $31.3 million from the amount approved by the 2021 legislature. The agency's revised estimate includes 10 adjustments listed on pages 871 and 872. About half of those adjustment items are related to COVID-19 relief funding. Looking at the top of the page on 873, the governor recommends a fiscal year 2022 revised estimate of $6.5 billion, including $4.6 billion SGF. That's an increase of $404.4 million, including an SGF increase of $394.1 million above the agency's fiscal year 2022 revised estimate. That increase is primarily attributable to the governor recommending the elimination of delayed school payments and paying off CAPERS layering payments in fiscal year 2022. The governor's recommendation includes the adjustments listed on 873 and 874. Starting with the first one, the governor recommends adoption of the fall 2021 education consensus estimates. For school finance, the governor recommends decreased expenditures of $49.2 million, including $59.5 million SGF below the approved amount and below the agency's revised estimate. For CAPERS, the governor recommends decreased expenditures of $35.1 million, all SGF. The individual components of the fall 2021 education consensus estimate are described in more detail in the special topics section on page 885. The second item on that page, the education superhighway. The governor recommends additional expenditures of a little over $178,000 SGF for the state match for the Education Superhighway program in fiscal year 2022. That program supports school building access to high-speed internet and requires a 10% state match to gain the 90% federal funding. USD 361 notified KSDE that its E-rate funding application was approved in fiscal year 2022 and would require this additional state funding. Still on page 873, the next item is to eliminate delayed school payments. The governor recommends additional expenditures of $199.6 million SGF to eliminate delayed state aid payments to school districts in fiscal year 2022. And that item does review the history of these delayed payments. The governor is recommending ending this accounting practice in 2022 by appropriating one-time funds of $199.6 million SGF total, which amounts to $161.3 million for state foundation aid and $38.2 million for supplemental state general funds. Turning to the next page, the last item I'll highlight in the governor's recommendation is the KPERS layering payment payoff. The governor recommends additional expenditures of $253.9 million SGF to pay off the debt of KPERS school payments to the state's retirement system in fiscal year 2022. To keep the retirement system whole, the state has previously agreed to annual layering payments for 20 years for each of the missed payments. So the governor is recommending paying off the debt for both missed payments in fiscal year 2022 by appropriating the remaining balance for both of those missed payments, totaling $253.9 million SGF. The recommendation by the governor is estimated to save the state an aggregate of $189.9 million in interest payments over each loan's final maturity. And the governor's recommendation also includes 269.3 FTE positions, and that is unchanged from the agency's fiscal year 2022 revised estimate. And I'm happy to pause there for questions on fiscal year 2022.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's a good place to pause. What questions, committee, do you have? Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And thanks for being here to go over this. On the elimination of the delayed school payment, so I actually remember when this happened. But this is a one-time, this is a one-time expenditure?
That's correct.
So allowed for that correction. Thank you.
Committee, what other questions? Senator Suellentrop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure if it's been asked or not, but could you give us an idea how much either Spark funds or federal funds you've received here in the last 12 months?
And is that specific for just K through 12 that you're asking about? Okay.
Sure. We do have a memo that reviews the entirety of COVID-19 federal funds. I could pull the fiscal year 22 numbers as well. I do have the fiscal year 2023 that I'm happy to provide now, but I can get back to you on fiscal year 2022.
Why don't you go ahead and share 2023 with us?
Sure. So the Kansas Department of Education is budgeting $479.1 million in COVID-19 relief expenditures for fiscal year 2023. That includes $458.2 million in ESSER programs and $20.8 million for EANS, which is the non-public school funding. That is an increase of $124.9 million above the fiscal year 22 revised estimate.
JG, did you have something to add? I'm sorry, could you say that in the microphone?
With those two numbers, I believe that we can just back the number in for 22.
Okay.
The 400 and, what was the numbers again?
479.1 million. It's 124.9 million above the fiscal year 22 revised estimate.
We'll let you get out your calculator. While you're doing that, we'll go ahead and have a question from Senator Gossage, and then we'll go back to Senator Suellentrop.
I understood her to say on the second page where it says federal COVID-19 funding, the agency's revised estimate of 2022 includes $345 million from federal COVID-19 relief funding. So is that just the estimate of how much we think will be coming in, or is that's a yes? Okay. So to answer Senator Suellentrop's question, we don't know how much has already been received in 2022.
Correct. I would need to double check on the amounts that have been expended or drawn down, but we do have that estimate of what the total fiscal year 22 budget should be for COVID-19.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to get the numbers straight here. So the $345 million is for 2022, and then there's an additional 479 million for 23? Or are those two numbers a combination of 22 and 23?
We would need to double check on, JG, do you have anything to add?
Madam Chair, I believe that would be the total expenditures that would be in 2022, and then the total expenditures are going to be in 2023.
Follow up, Senator Straub, and then we'll go back to Senator Solentrop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we're basically adding the 345 plus the 479. Some quick mental math, that would be around 825 total, 825 million? Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure that's,
Seeing head shakes. So
Okay.
that would be a yes. Okay. Senator Solentrop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd also ask how much of that remains within an account and how much of it has gotten out to school districts and which school districts?
Certainly. We do update our ESSER spreadsheet monthly. I will note that COVID-19 funds generally are drawn down, so they are not appropriated and sitting in an account. They would rather be reimbursed for expenditures already made. But we could definitely get more detail on per district information for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I think a part of that, one of the things that I've heard from school district representatives is though it appears as if there are ESSER funds that they have essentially within the district been encumbered for upcoming expenses. So with that spreadsheet that you're maintaining, are you able to discern what funds that may still not have been expended but are actually encumbered, so to speak?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, Senator Solentrop.
If I may, thank you very much. Can you also tell us whether those funds are expended to the school districts based on the formula? And if not, what formula did they use
Certainly.
and why?
So the ESSER funds generally were allocated based on the Title I formula. We can definitely get some more information on how much was allocated to each school district, but that formula would be the Title I formula.
I guess the question that I have has to do with regard to capers, and I believe that there is at least one, if not more than one, House bill with regard to capers payments or payoffs. So when we're looking at what is on page 874, that layering payment payoff, are there bills out there, House or Senate, that are doing exactly that?
There are a couple of bills out there. We would have to double check to make sure that the language is doing the same thing. But there are a couple of bills addressing the capers layering payment.
Thank you. And now, more specifically, we will call on Senator Petty.
Well, Ways and Means just voted on that last week. The total package.
Okay, so go ahead. I've heard the discussion from the House standpoint, not heard the discussion from the Senate standpoint. So clarify what it was that you said off mic.
Well, he was just giving me, saying I was a yes vote, but he was a yes vote too, so.
Okay, so we have two yes
here.
votes for this committee, but what was the yes vote for?
So it paid off the 2 years that we hadn't paid our portion of it, as well as the $194 million.
So Senator Solentrop, I guess,
In addition, Madam Chair, it will not go through the education budget. It will go straight into capers. So we'll bypass the
so
budget.
I think it would be helpful if we see that updated in some manner.
Certainly.
With this document for us, since that's now off the table. I think that would be helpful. Okay. Committee, any other questions or at this point in time, Gabrielle has spoken to the governor's recommendation. So committee, at this point in time, are you wanting to stop and hear from the agency about their recommendations? Because They are different from the governor's. So committee, are you wanting, so that would be page 871 and 872. Are you wanting to hear from the Kansas Department of Education with regard to those items? There are 11 of those, or are you wanting to move forward? Okay, I'm hearing that they would definitely like to hear. So Gabriella, if you want to take a seat. And so is it going to be Dr. Nunswander or is it going to be Mr.? Okay. We're getting all kinds of pointing, nodding of heads, so I will try and interpret what it is that we're perceiving. Thank you for being here today, Craig.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee, and I will reserve the right to phone a friend on detailed questions.
You have your lifelines. There you go.
Thank you. I appreciate that. The state board's items are for fiscal year 23. They don't have anything in fiscal year 22 that they would request other than what the governor has already requested in her budget. So I would begin looking at fiscal year 23.
So we're looking at page 876, is that right?
I believe so, but let me
Okay.
get the page to be
So we're
sure.
jumping forward. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
So for fiscal year 23, the state board would like to request an enhancement for special education funding. And this is the issue many of you are familiar with. State law requires that 92% of excess costs be funded. And the funding as appropriated has not been at that level since 2010-11. When that happens, services for special education are required to be provided by both federal and state law, so school districts cannot simply reduce the special education budget. They have to take the funding from some other program within the district and move it to special education. So in fiscal year 23, the estimate from the consensus estimating group is that we would be at approximately 70% of excess costs, which would be about $155 million short of 92%. The state board's request is not that all of that funding be made up at one time. That's a big jump from 70.8% to 92%, but that it be phased in over a 5-year time period. And there's a table on the request that we submitted that shows each year we tried to level off the cost, allowing for inflation each year in excess costs. So each year from 2023 through 2027, it would require $68,215,146. And that is the request from the State Board of Education to reach 92% of excess costs in special education. The other requests that the State Board put forward were included in the governor's recommendations on her budget with a couple maybe of small variances. Professional development, the State Board had requested full funding of the professional development program, which current law provides reimbursement to school districts of 1/2% of the general fund or 50% of actual costs in professional development. The estimate is that that would be about $3,600,000. The governor recommended funding at $1,770,000, which would be a prorated amount comparable to what has been in place in some prior years. The state board supports that recommendation, believing that funding to help train teachers is some of the best support that we can provide for our students in the classroom. The governor also recommended, along with the state board, the Mental Health Intervention Team Pilot Program, an additional $3 million to expand that. Our estimate is that would provide 15 to 25 additional school districts in that program, depending on the size of the district and the number of personnel that they would need, number of social workers and so forth to implement the program. That amount of money also, in the governor's recommendation, would provide for a third-party study to evaluate the success of the program, where has it worked well, what types of items might be done better in future years. This is the 4th year for that pilot study, so probably an appropriate time for that to take place. Career and technical education transportation. The state has provided funding in prior years to offset part of the cost that school districts incur when they transport students to excel in CTE programs. It was known for a long time as Senate Bill 155 from the year it originally passed. Thankfully, we now have a name that doesn't reference a Senate bill. So in 11th and 12th grade students are transported to technical colleges or community colleges for approved career and tech ed programs and earn certifications. School districts have been reimbursed for a portion of that cost. The request that was recommended also by the governor was for $1,482,338, and that would partially fund that reimbursement to school districts. National Board Certification, the governor's Teaching Excellence Program. School districts are required to pay a $1,000 bonus to those teachers who earn National Board Certification. That's a very rigorous program that teachers go through to earn certification. It's training as well as observed practice to earn that National Board Certification. Statute requires the districts to pay the $1,000, whether the reimbursement from the state occurs or not. So the state board's request and the governor's recommendation was for $360,693 to fund that program, which also provides some scholarships for teachers participating in earning the certification. Another item that's quite familiar, I'm sure, from prior years, the statewide dyslexia coordinator. The Legislative Task Force on Dyslexia first recommended the creation of that position in 2019 and followed that each year with a recommendation to the legislature. This year, the state board decided not to wait another year on funding and used part of the set-aside ESSER funds to fund that position. So we do currently have a statewide dyslexia coordinator in the department funded with the ESSER funds. The request is, as the Legislative Task Force recommended, that that be funded with state general funds in the future years. That position then will be in place to implement the statewide early literacy initiatives, to provide professional development services, to work with the post-secondary institutions in implementing their programs for pre-service teacher training, and provide training for teachers across the state. And as I said, that position is in place, but with ESSER funds, so that's a limited time frame that can be funded. The request is that come from the state general fund. And then another one we would touch on, the delayed payments for general fund and supplemental general fund state aid have been in place since 2005. They were put in place originally as a budget assistance for the state when money was short. It simply delayed payment from June to July, so it moved it into the next fiscal year. School districts are required to record that payment in June as though they received it in the current fiscal year, even though they don't receive it until the following year. So it is true that school districts do not receive all of their state aid until the year is actually over. That, for some districts, creates some cash flow issues. At the end of the year, they're going to have to look at bills and what can they sit on and pay and what can they go ahead and pay before the year's over. This is, as Gabrielle mentioned, a one-time payment that would keep the state on track henceforth and forevermore, once it's made, of $199 million, just under $200 million. And all state aid then would be paid in the appropriate year. School districts are audited annually by independent CPAs. They may be as happy as anybody if this change is made, that they don't have to record payments incorrectly in the future. But for school districts, it would be a significant benefit. For the state, I believe you heard the state budget director talk about bringing a little more accurate picture to your ending cash balance. It's a little difficult to state what your ending cash balance is, knowing that you've got $200 million that's going to go out the next week that really should have been spent in the current fiscal year. So I'll stop there on that one. You heard and discussed already the delayed CAPERS payments that the governor has recommended. Education superhighway, I want to touch on this just a little bit because this could get a little confusing. School districts can apply to E-rate to increase their broadband connections in their buildings. There is a 10%, if it's approved, then there is a 10% match from the state that helps pay for that cost. There had been funding available in prior years, and we were under the impression that every application had gone through and been approved, so there was no need to ask for additional funding this year for the 10% match. It turns out one school district, USD 361, just had their application approved recently by the federal E-rate folks, so the 10% match for them would be $178,986, and that was included in the governor's recommendation. There are two things, I believe just two, outside of the governor's recommendations that we would touch on, miscellaneous budget issues, if you will. In the income tax laws for the state, there's a local school district contribution checkoff fund so that taxpayers can check a box for their and enter their USD number and donate a portion of their refund or all to the school district of their choice, which is all well and good. That works well for school districts, except not everybody knows their USD number. And so we have numbers entered incorrectly, we have numbers left blank, and as a result, the state currently has $14,227.11 sitting in the account that can't be distributed to anybody. If we could have a proviso in the budget bill that would allow us to distribute that money equally to all school districts, the state would not need to leave that money just sitting there, but it would be able to be used for its intended purpose. Somebody wanted it to go to a school district to help. We just have no way of knowing who with the information we have available. So our suggestion would be to put a proviso in place and let us divide that up amongst the school districts. The other item is capital improvement state aid transfer. That is funded by a demand transfer from the state general fund under statute, except for fiscal years 20, 21, and 22 when it's a revenue transfer. The governor's recommendation includes continuing to make that revenue transfer through FY24. Our suggestion would be to amend the statute so that it permanently becomes a revenue transfer, if that's the desire. That way, it would eliminate the need to update the statute every few years to make it a revenue transfer through a certain number of years. If you would like to just make that permanent, you wouldn't need to remember to make that change periodically. And then the last 2 pages of the document we submitted does contain COVID relief funding that is a part of our budget. And we being probably John, would be happy to answer questions on that as well as any of the other items in our information.
Committee, what questions do you have for the agency requests? One of the questions that I have, could you please provide the committee with a map with regard to the MHIT pilot program? So it's in its fourth year. Could you provide us with a map of the districts that are included right now?
Sure.
Okay.
I say that. I'm sure we can, yes.
Okay. And I guess I'm a little curious because it indicates that the 3 million would expand the program to another 15 to 25 USDs. What's the selection process? And that's quite a swing of 15 to 25. So what is the selection process for which districts get to participate?
Good question. So districts have applied in prior years to participate in the program, and the funding that's been available is laid out to pay for 75% of the cost of a liaison within the school district. The additional 25% then is earmarked and sent on to the Community Mental Health Center to help offset their costs. So in the past, when they have applied, we've had a certain appropriation from the legislature. Districts apply and lay out what their costs are going to be, how much money, and as it has worked out up until last year, the money has been sufficient to cover those districts who applied. We haven't had to tell anybody no. Now, in part, that sounds magical and wonderful, but in part, in the first year, there are a very specific set of districts. The legislature knew what their costs were going to be and funded those costs, so that was a given. This past year, the appropriation was equal to what it had been the year before, so we were not able to grow, so we did not take new applications for new districts. We made some adjustments within the existing districts because some wanted additional funds, some actually wanted less, and we ended up prorating the money that was available to make adjustments to the new ones. So if additional money is appropriated, we will go through the same application process. The number of districts, in large part, will be determined by how large they are. How many liaisons do they need? How many different schools are there with a liaison in them? So a district like USD 501 is going to require a lot more funding than Silver Lake, sort of next door. That's why that's more the reason for the variation in 15 to 25. We don't know at this point which districts might apply.
I think it would be helpful, one, to have a map, two, to have the information with regard to those that are already participating in the pilot program. Are they 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6A? So that we know that the different sizes are being represented. Also, I'm a little curious, early on that when there was discussion before the MHIT pilot program was put into law, there was a question about did it have to be a CMHC as opposed to a community health center? Because what we did hear from community health centers is they did provide mental health services, but their concern was that they were being excluded. So if you could find out for us if that is still the case, because that to me is an area of the state that perhaps is not being represented with the mental health services simply because they're tethered to a CHC rather than a CMHC.
And, excuse me, Madam Chair, that I can address now.
Okay.
This year, we do have, I want to say 3 districts, that number may be wrong, but that are working with other community mental health providers other than a CMHC. Okay. And that's part of our analysis, if you will, as the year goes on, is how's that relationship working, what works well and what doesn't.
Okay. Committee, what questions do you have? Senator Sykes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here, Craig. Can you clarify on that special ed? I wrote down 68 million increase, but on here it's 74. So I was just trying to.
Thank you. Good, very good question. When we initially went through the information with the state board, it was July. And at that time, 74 million was the number it would have taken over 5 years to reach. Since then, we've had an adjustment in some costs and numbers, and so it is now 68.2 million, 68,215,146.
Thank you for that. And then my next question, on the dyslexia coordinator, has that position been filled? I know there were a couple of positions and we were having trouble. Can you just update us on that?
Yes, ma'am. That position was filled first of December, actually. Dr. Lori Curtis is now the dyslexia coordinator for the state.
Okay, I have Senator Solentrop, and then we'll go to Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do we have any, I don't see any in your report anywhere that tells us the number of students that are in or K-12. If you could give me that over the last 60 months, and then what the staffing is. We have administrators, teachers,
Okay.
and then all others.
You want totals for the state or by district?
Well, you can give it to me by district, but primarily the state, primarily just the state.
And I'm sorry, what did you say as far as the time frame? Are you looking at the last several years?
Well, I'd like to see it over 60 months. I'm just looking for
Okay.
trends.
Okay.
Just looking for trends.
And I
So
think-
Statewide's fine.
Okay.
Just, again, administrators, actual teachers, and then all others, and then student populations. Thank you.
And I think, Craig, a couple of years ago, that was provided on a spreadsheet of certified and non-certified. So I think that would be helpful. I know that I believe we do have the information with regard to enrollment over the course of several years. I think we kind of started the session with that. So that, I think you can just pull up and provide for us. Did you have a follow-up question or? Okay, now we'll go to Senator Gossage. And then Senator Straub, did you have your hand up? Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here. I'm sorry, I'm back on page 2 of your report, the Special Education Services State Aid. I'm trying to understand why we're in arrears, and I can understand the recommendation to spread this out over a 5-year period, but I'm trying to understand where these funds that are in arrears, why are we there, and why do we need to do this?
Okay. So statute requires 92% of excess costs to be funded by the state. If the appropriation is not sufficient to cover that cost, then it's prorated. That's kind of the short version. So the appropriation has not been sufficient to cover 92%. So it gets prorated, and as I said, for FY23, the estimate is it'll be about 70.8%. The state, for the past 4 years, maybe 5, has been adding $7.5 million per year for special education funding. Costs, however, increase faster than that. Total cost for special education is a little over $1 billion. So $7.5 million is not a huge percentage, and the cost goes up faster than 0.75%, which is why we continue to lower our percentage of excess cost each year. The increased funding is not keeping up with the increase in costs. Does that answer the question?
It does answer my question. And if I may, Madam Chair, just as a follow-up, do we know how many students we are servicing with those funds of did you say 1 billion?
For special education, approximately 29,000.
29,000 students for 1 billion.
And that may be FTE. I'll double check that number for you.
Okay, that would be helpful. Thank you very much, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Yep. Committee, other questions? Senator Petty?
Craig, I know you provided in your testimony about the COVID-19 relief funding. And could you, I'm trying to remember if we've gone over this in this committee before, but when we look at how much a district has, and it is based on their Title I, correct? Is that correct?
It is correct.
And then so it's based on their Title I, they have a figure out there, but then there is a formula for how they can then request that money. And it's, I'm not sure we've gone over that in this committee about what those particular requirements are that come to us or come to you through the federal government, correct?
Yes.
So maybe we could, if that hasn't been provided for us, Madam Chair, has that been provided for us before?
I don't believe it has been.
Maybe that could be provided for this committee about what those guidelines are.
Certainly. And Madam Chair, I can walk through that real quick if you'd like.
That's fine.
So for any federal funds, the federal government likes for that to be, for their money to be used as a reimbursement. So the money is always at the federal level. So whether it's ESSER funds, Title I, special education, the State Department doesn't have it, the districts don't have it until they spend the money. So the money is sitting at the federal level. School districts make their expenditure and then request reimbursement, whether it's ESSER or Title I, whatever the case may be, but in this case, ESSER funds. They have their expenditures approved by the task force and the state board. Their plan is approved. Then as they spend the money monthly, they will request reimbursement from the State Department. We request it from the federal level, and the money flows to us and through the school district then. They are allowed up to 1 month in advance. So if I know I'm going to be spending $200,000 next month, I can ask for that now. But I can't ask for $200,000 and then change my mind and only spend $100,000. I'm not allowed to leave that extra $100,000 sitting in my account. It has to be spent, as I say, primarily as a reimbursement. The way most people look at it, the federal government, if there's going to be any interest earned, they want it. They don't want the school districts pulling it down and earning that interest.
Absolutely. Senator Dietrich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's along those same lines. So can you give us just a quick little briefing on what those dollars are being used for? Because it's very restrictive in general. Is it staffing? Is it?
Staffing, well, where to start? Initially, with ESSER 1, it was primarily technology, personal protective devices, cleaning, those kinds of things, because districts were just gearing up into students aren't going to be here, they're going to be at home, and then come August, they are going to be here. How do we make our buildings safe for students and staff and visitors? So a lot of ESSER 1 funds went for technology, for those that would be learning from home, and for cleaning, maintenance, those types of issues, dealing with keeping your building safe. ESSER 2 funds, and as well as ESSER 3 then, are shifting more towards, particularly with ESSER 3, learning loss types of activities, whether that's summer school, after-school programs, additional staff, whether that's additional teachers, paras. Mental health has been a focus for a fair amount of the money, over $20 million, in fact. And then premium pay, and that's kind of a long story in itself, and some of you may have been aware. Federal funds are not allowed to be used for bonuses. So initially we had to tell districts you can't provide bonuses for your staff even though they're doing more work and putting in more time and so forth. Then the federal government put out the notion of premium pay for additional work, hazardous work, those types of issues. So a pretty good amount of the money now has gone for premium pay to teachers, counselors, cooks, bus drivers, custodians for the additional work that had to be done because of COVID.
So I think before we move on, because we do have Melissa Rooker down, Executive Director of Kansas Children's Cabinet, that's here to testify, talk to us about why the request of the agency is different from the request of the governor.
The primary difference is the special education, and that's the state board's request. I can't speak for why it was not included in the governor's recommendations, but the state board recognizes that when special education is not funded at 92% of excess costs, school districts have to make up that cost from some other portion of their budget. And so they believe fairly strongly that needs to be funded. And that's essentially the difference between the governor's recommendation and the state board's.
Okay, and I'm not sure if this is a question for you or for Gabriella, but when the agency, as well as the governor, came up with their budget and their budget requests, was that before or after the Apex bill was passed by the House and the Senate?
I can tell you that was before.
Okay. So what has the governor's office or what has your agency done to potentially make adjustments should that financial burden be something for the state?
We have not had that discussion within the agency.
Okay. I think that's important for us to consider. So committee, one more time, if there are any questions. I'm not seeing hands for any questions. So at this point in time, I will call on Melissa Rooker to come forward to speak with regard to your oral testimony on behalf of the Kansas Children's Cabinet and Trust Fund.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the chance to address the committee. I keep my mask on. I'm still recuperating from some surgery. So our ask is simple. We support the contents of the governor's budget recommendation for the Children's Initiative Fund. The reason I'm here in front of you is because our budget is embedded with the Kansas Department of Education budget overall. So we, as a cabinet, have a process. Our governing board does review annually the performance of the funds in the CIF and then votes on budget recommendations. That meeting took place in June of this year, and the recommendations were to make some adjustments to line items within the CIF to better utilize the master tobacco settlement funds for to meet the program priorities of the Children's Cabinet. So we have an ask to rearrange the CADE line item, which is a special grant fund that the legislature put in place 4 budget cycles ago. We've been operating it as a separate standalone RFP process. What we'd like to do is roll that into the early childhood block grant and continue with the program, but it aligns nicely with the requirements that we have in place for the early childhood block grants. So we want to be able to utilize staff time better and make the application process easier as opposed to running 2 separate RFPs. We have 4 line items that we are requesting no longer be transferred out of the Children's Initiative Fund so that those resources can be used differently within the CIF. And we did the appropriate work last spring with the agencies that are affected by those recommendations to ensure that the programs were supported either with existing resources, in several cases it's federal resources. The one item that has some effect probably on state budget is the Children's Mental Health Waiver Service. That was being funded with tobacco funds, and with the Secretary's support, the recommendation was to stop using tobacco funds because those are Medicaid waiver services delivered to children. So that request should be embedded in the Medicaid overall funding request for the Medicaid program. And then we have recommended that there be a slight adjustment to the early childhood block grant to allow better grant-making capacity for the cabinet. We would like to see an increase in the line item for universal home visiting. That is a line item that gets transferred to KDHE for implementation of those universal home visiting services, a new line item to fund the Dolly Parton Imagination Library Program, and a new line item to help the cabinet support the work going on in the early childhood sector as collaboration between DCF, KDHE, KSDE, and the Children's Cabinet. So we would like to be able to support some of the programs and projects that we have been engaged in over the last 3 or 4 years as a team. I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Betty, do you have any questions? Senator Sykes, and then Senator Gossage, do you have a question also? Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here, Melissa. And I served on the Children's Cabinet, but isn't the Children's Mental Health Waiver, doesn't that expand what the target of the Children's Initiative Fund? So realigning this would actually benefit so that you are aligning with your population of the cabinet.
Yeah, the federal program, the Children's Mental Health Waiver, serves a population of children from 5 to 18 years old. So the cabinet focuses on early childhood, 0 to 5-year-olds. So there is not much overlap. It's a transfer that started, I believe, in 2014, and it was just a means to maintain the state power to draw down federal funds. So it really is the state share. It's we receive a head count and an age breakdown of the children who receive services, but that is the only information that's appropriate to share with our team. And so it falls outside of the evaluation program that we have in place. And it's a Medicaid waiver service. So it's an unusual thing for the CIF to be funding.
Senator Gossage?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Melissa, for being here. Near the end of your testimony, when you mentioned the Dolly Parton Imagination Library, initially you were instructed to use federal funds, and you're now saying those federal funds are no longer available?
We are using federal funds currently for the first year of implementation. It is we did not receive pandemic relief. We have a federal grant called the Preschool Development Grant. It's a 3-year grant that's entering its final year, and so we are looking ahead to when these funds run out. So for FY23, in order to continue the program, we need to identify a more stable source of funding because these funds will not exist. They also have some prohibitions against supplanting existing funds. The program is designed for the state partner to match 50% of the cost that local affiliates incur. So we are funding together, that 100% is covering the cost of postage, and then the Dollywood Foundation is covering the rest of the cost of the program, the purchasing and the printing of the books and all of that. So we cover the cost of mailing 1 book a month to every child enrolled. The idea is that we would partner with local affiliates, and they exist I think 79 counties already have the program in place. We're supposed to match 50% of what they are funding so that we can double the reach of the program. But in working with the Dollywood Foundation, what we've had to do this year with the federal funds that prevent us from supplanting existing resources is focus on counties that do not have the program at all. What we're asking for is a line item to stand the program up statewide and truly be the kind of partner that was intended. So we are delighted that we are part of this program. Every month, a child is mailed a book. This is the way they're packaged. They're shrink wrapped. There's just a mailing label. There's no leaflets, no other information mailed. It truly is a child receiving a new book in the mail to sit down and read at home with their parents. So we love this program. It's one of the purest forms of interaction a parent can have with their child, is to just sit and read and interact that way and help strengthen their children's early literacy skills and love of reading. And we want to be a true partner. So we are seeking the line item so that we can sustain the program.
Thank you for that. And how do children sign up for this program?
Parents can choose to sign up, so we would like to be able to really, as the state partner, leverage our reach, work with the hospital system so that when a new baby is born, a parent receives materials to be aware that the program exists. Otherwise, it's local advertising through the local partners. And it takes a 501c3 to be a partner. So it's, in the state, it's United Way chapters, it's library foundations, it's basically nonprofits. And so it's advertised as an opportunity. Libraries will share information or whatever. A parent can choose to sign their child up, and they interact directly with the Imagination Library program, so they don't sign up through us.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any further questions, so I appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.
Committee, we are at the end of time for our meeting today, so we are closing the hearing on the Kansas State Department of Education. Tomorrow, we will have our budget hearing on the Kansas School for the Deaf and the Kansas School for the Blind. That does mean that when we are meeting on Wednesday, we are going to be looking at trying to take action with regard to these two budgets. Also looking at taking action on Senate Bill 215. We will have a hearing that's scheduled for Wednesday. I don't have the bill number down. Thank you, 496. And then on Thursday, we're having a hearing on Senate Bill 363 and 393. They're very similar. They're not identical, but very similar. We are scheduled to meet, we're going to meet Friday at noon. Lunch will be provided. We need to make sure that we are getting our bills out before turnaround. So we really just have Friday and Monday to work on that. I do want us to be working on making some decisions on what we're going to be doing on the documentation on needs assessment. So I know Senator Dietrich had already indicated that she had some amendments that she wanted to work on that. So if we can continue to kind of move forward, I do want us on Friday to be looking at Senate Bill 341, which is that federal impact aid. So thank you much for your attention today, and I'll see you tomorrow. Committee meeting is adjourned.